All right, we get ready to get started? Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here at the Ward 6 office. My name is Miranda Schubert. I'm the council member for Ward 6. This is actually our first co-hosted public event at the Ward 6 office, so I'm really excited. Just a couple of quick housekeeping items. There are bathrooms through that door and also by where you came in the entrance. And then there's a water bottle filling station and drinking fountain in the back. And then there's refreshments on the back table as well. But make yourselves comfortable. Our home is your home. Okay, so it's no coincidence that our first gathering focuses on an issue I heard about repeatedly while knocking on doors across the city. Residents shared concerns about the safety of their daily commutes, the impacts of climate change, and the importance of having access to a wide range of mobility options for themselves, for their children, and for people from all stages of life. I'm grateful to the Living Streets Alliance for creating this space for this conversation and for bringing together voices with a variety of experiences and perspectives to help keep the public informed on issues that affect our region in very meaningful ways. And we're talking about a 20-year transportation plan. I want to be very clear about my role tonight. This event is not about advocating for or against any ballot measure, nor is it about directing public resources toward a particular outcome. Rather, it is about providing an opportunity for members of the public to ask questions, hear information, and educate themselves about RTA Next from perspectives that may not always be readily available in more formal and traditional settings. Creating spaces for learning and dialogue like this is fully appropriate and is well within the bounds of my responsibilities as your council member. One of the guiding principles I try to lead with is education, learning from one another, asking thoughtful questions, and making room for information sharing in good faith. Alongside that are transparency, accessibility, accountability, integrity, and love for Tucson. Those values are what brings us together tonight, a shared commitment to understanding complex issues and engaging respectfully even when our viewpoints may differ. My hope is that this evening helps residents feel more informed, more empowered, and more connected to the decisions that shape our community. Thank you for being a part of that process and for showing up with curiosity and with care for Tucson's future. One last announcement for those of you who are really interested in getting involved, there are open seats on the Complete Streets and Transit Advisory Commissions. Commission work is very rewarding and meaningful, so reach out to the Ward 6 office if you're interested in either of those vacancies. Thank you so much again for being here.
Thank you, Miranda and the Ward 6 staff who have been very generous with their time and space in hosting this event for us. My name is Vanessa Casio. I am the Executive Director of Living Streets Alliance. We are a local nonprofit based here in Tucson, advocating for safer streets and a transportation future that is safe and convenient no matter how you choose to get around. And in true LSA fashion, I want to invite you for a moment of connection. So for 1 minute, I don't want to take up too much time. I would love for you to turn to your neighbor and share what's one thing that would make getting around Tucson feel safer or easier for you. Turn to your neighbor. I'll give you a minute. All right. I hate to cut the conversation short, but what I hear, we can wrap up, is transportation is one of those things that impact all of us. And this shared experience, the little bit that you were able to share with your neighbor, is exactly why we're here tonight. And to have a conversation about our streets and our future and the choices our community faces. Now, if you were my neighbor, if you were sitting next to me, what I would share is this morning as my family's getting ready for the day, the conversation inevitably goes, who's picking up my 7-year-old from school? Oh, shoot. Oh, I have a meeting. Oh, I didn't put that in the calendar. Oh, what about tomorrow? And what would make it really easy for me as a working mom is the day when my son can independently walk and bike and get around on a bus. And I don't think that future should feel that far off if we make the right decisions now. So tonight we're excited to explore this a little bit more, to learn from cities that have prioritized safety and transit and equity, and to explore the challenges and opportunities before us as we consider the next 20 years of transportation with RTA Next. And I am thrilled and honored to be joined today by Tom Thivener, who is actually here on holiday in Tucson and has generously offered his time to speak with us and put together this beautiful presentation. So I want to introduce you to Tom. Tom is a Tucson native, and his career has been shaped from cities like Calgary and Vancouver, but he got his start here as Tucson's bicycle and pedestrian coordinator, kickstarting our Bike Boulevard network. So that's network of low-stress streets that is now coming to fruition that we're all enjoying. We can thank Tom for that. He's a co-founder of our beloved Open Streets event, Cyclovia Tucson, which we are in the midst of preparing our 24th event this spring. Thank you, Tom, for that legacy. And securing funding for sidewalks and safe crossings and the infrastructure that many of us still benefit from today. Since then, Tom has led active transportation planning in Canada, building complete streets, protected bike lanes, and transit-focused networks that increase ridership, improve safety, and create vibrant, walkable communities. So tonight, Tom's going to share his insights and experiences here and from Canada to guide how we are thinking about the next 20 years. So without any further ado, please join me in welcoming Tom.
Okay, it's great to be back. I see many familiar faces in the crowd from the many years that I was at the City of Tucson. So thanks everybody for coming out, and to everybody I haven't met yet. Thank you for bringing in the energy and the support to learn a bit more about how some of the work that I've done has made a difference. And of course, I didn't start it all, and I won't take credit for it all, but Canada is actually doing some amazing things from an urban point of view and a mobility point of view. So I'm going to get into that. But first, just a quick caveat. I have a lot of slides, so I move pretty quick, so don't blink too much. But it'll all be good. I have 4 main topics. Get a little bit more about me and how I ended up in Canada. I'll go over that. Lessons from Canada. I'll probably do a deep dive into Calgary, because I was there for 7 years. I've been in Vancouver area for about 5 years and currently work there. But I think the general what's going on in Calgary is probably a little bit more relatable to what Tucson has in terms of it being kind of a Rocky Mountain city, about 1.5 million people. And it's really progressive in terms of the policy, and it's very forward-thinking. Then I'll go into some observations that I have from riding my bike around Tucson, sometimes driving. I'm based on the east side. That's where my parents still live. And so I'll share some observations and thoughts that might influence future planning work, and leave you with some final considerations before we switch gears. So just in case everybody's not familiar with where Calgary and Vancouver are, I did provide a map so you could see. I did start my career here in Tucson, grew up on the east side. My first job was actually delivering newspapers as a paper boy, and so that was fun. And then when I was 16, 18 years old, I had a brief love affair with automobiles and had a few Nissan 300ZXs and 280ZXs. But I ended up selling each one to make a trip to Europe. And so those trips ended up kind of opening up my eyes into how urban planning can be different, and I started having, questioning, why is the east side the way it is? Why is Tucson the way it is? Why is Phoenix the way it is? And I didn't have all the answers then, but it kind of got me onto a path where I decided to become an urban planner. I did study abroad for a couple of semesters in Vancouver, so that's kind of how I got the connection to Canada. And from that learnings, I ended up finishing my degrees at the U of A, first in Geography Regional Development, and then later with the Master's of Planning program. And then I started working. Like, I had a family by then, and so started out at the town of Marana as a planner one, and then eventually got the job as bike ped coordinator for City of Tucson. And that job totally got me the job at City of Calgary. And so, yeah, let me tell you about Calgary. Actually, I won't go into this, but these are some of the things that I got to work on in Tucson. Bike boulevards I can't take entire credit for. There was, obviously 3rd Street existed beforehand, but I was kind of the guy that said, why don't we have a network of these things? And started planning, okay, Treat is a logical one, 4th Fontana is a logical one, and there was really just a lot of energy. And so I kind of thrive off that energy and then focus my efforts on trying to figure out solutions to make it more possible. So Calgary, I was there from 2012 to 2019. I had 2 different jobs. I started out as the cycling coordinator. They were very excited to hire me, somebody with experience. They basically developed a policy that a cycling strategy policy, and needed a coordinator to implement that. So I was the guy that they selected for that. And I decided to follow the 5 E's approach, which is simply like use engineering, evaluation, enforcement, et cetera, to instill a well-rounded program. And so I did that, worked out pretty good for a while. But first I'll just share some observations, like as a Tucsonan going into Canada, it's a little bit odd. I did get used to it, but some of the nuances, when you ride a bike, like I continued to ride my exercycle around for years there, it's a pretty flat city. The Rocky Mountains are at the western edge, and so you got to drive for about 45 minutes to get there. But when you're in the city, it's pretty vibrant, pretty easy to get around, good grid. But when you get to the river pathways, which are kind of like the trunk lines into the city that go into the downtown, you end up seeing some unique things. So geese are something that show up every spring, and there are thousands of them. And so you do need to take care when you're on the bike paths, not to avoid those. My family settled into a neighborhood that was off of the red line light rail line that was put in for the '88 Olympics. And so when we knew that, I'd been to Calgary for a couple of days before deciding to move up there, and I knew that they had light rail. But when we decided to move, we left the car behind and actually decided to live car-free. We found a home right off of near this station, which was more of a neighborhood-based station, but the trains come every 3 to 5 minutes during the peak hour, so it was like a dream. And we could walk basically 5 minutes to get to the station, and rent wasn't that bad. We lived in a single-family house with somebody that lived below, so kind of an legal suite, casita, I guess you call them here. But it ended up being pretty good for us because the family could hop on the train whenever they need to get anywhere. I would just kind of shoot down by bike, usually to get to work or most trips. But it was really a great experience for us and the family to be able to live car-free and just rely on the transit system, bike, and then they had car share as well. Car2Go was very popular in the city. Real fun picture here. I did skate before, because Tucson used to have an ice skate arena, but right in front of City Hall, there's actually an ice skate arena, so I got to skate in front of City Hall several times, so that was a lot of fun. And then the funniest thing I probably saw when I was living in Calgary is there was a hockey player that won the Stanley Cup with the Kings, and he showed up, in his old neighborhood pool, basically. He brought the cup, took a picture. So you see some funny things in Calgary. A little bit more background about the city. Founded in 1875, about 1.5 million people. It's the fastest growing city in Canada. It's probably going to hit 2 million people in the next 10 years. Massive growth, sprawling area, sprawling landmass, and then the Rocky Mountains are a bit west. And it's about 2 times as dense as Tucson. But the interesting thing about Calgary is it's really a city of contrasts. You have all the oil and gas companies headquartered there. You also have the Calgary Stampede, which is 1 week of wildness in July, where everybody lets their hair down, wears cowboy garb, and people start drinking early that day. It's also a city that's very diverse. Nayab Ninshi was the first Muslim mayor of a Canadian city, and everybody is from somewhere. Seems like everybody's from another country, and it's really easy to just get along with people there. It's also a city that knows how to move traffic really well. It has a skeletal roadway system, which is basically freeways. So you could get on the freeways and fly across town really quick. But they also do light rail. So I mentioned in '88, they put in the Red Line. And so this is an example of what the Red Line does when it gets to the highway. It's not always in the middle of the highway, but this is an example of how it operates when you get kind of outside the urban core. And it's also a place where its downtown is very, very vibrant. It's about 2 miles long by a mile wide. And so spatially, it's got a lot of density in that area. The oil and gas employees, there's towers like the one on the right where 90% of the employees come by sustainable modes. This didn't happen all at once. This has been the Calgary's plan for 20, 30 years, and they're starting to see the fruits of that. But public art is also embraced. They want to be kind of an icon, a destination, and the Peace Bridge is no better one. This ends up on the face of so many magazines and publications. But how did it get to these things? Well, the first thing that it did was they have a very good land use plan and transportation plan. These were actually developed in tandem at the same time, and they have very common, they basically try to achieve common outcomes such as improving housing choice, but making it within walking distance of great transit, and making sure that that transit service is fast, frequent, and reliable. So basically 10 minutes, every 10 minutes or faster. And it has specific targets. 1/3 of trips need to be sustainable. And what this looks like is, as you go across the city, I mean, obviously it's a very big city. When you get into the urban core, you have a lot more density. And so where the Red Line exists, that LRT, it kind of comes up into this area, goes to the university. That's where they're expecting to see most of the growth, and they're having the densest land uses. Out on the edges, they're expecting to have, normal suburbia. So it's kind of a balanced approach, but with a targeted efforts to make it more sustainable in certain areas. And so here's some of the targets that the city of Calgary is focusing on. It's still going to be pretty auto-dependent. About 77% of the trips are currently automobile. Their goal is to get it down about 10% from there. And obviously, they want transit to go up and walk bike to get up there. So the transit system is quite robust. The LRT system that I mentioned is part of the primary transit network. And so what that is basically the fast, frequent, reliable transportation service. It's primarily the articulated buses as well as the LRT trains. And their goal is to have 47% of the population within a 400-meter walk of that network. Or actually 47% are already within 400 meters, but their target is 60%. And so this ends up having a direct correlation on the budget. So when the budget comes out, everybody makes sure that there's enough money going into transit to make sure that they are advancing on these. So here's a bit more graphics about how the primary transit network works. I mentioned every 10 minutes or faster, every day of the week, for at least 15 hours a day. The other thing it does is make sure that safety, everybody feels comfortable on the trains. They've got 45 peace officers, transit peace officers, across the network at any given time so that everybody feels safe and comfortable. And so the downtown that I mentioned is really pretty vibrant and big. So that basically a kind of 4 or 5 square mile area, at least before COVID, there was 160,000 employees and 40,000 residents. And it was kind of divided by the CP rail line that went through here. That kind of separates the office area from the residential area. Some more tidbits about Calgary. They know how to move traffic. A lot of travel lanes in the downtown and a lot of parking. The one thing they did really good to encourage sustainable modes was they charge a lot for parking. So typically about $20 a day if you want to park. And they make it free to ride the train across downtown. So if you're coming in from the outer edges, yeah, you got to pay a few bucks to ride the train. But when you get into the downtown core, it's a free fare. You can kind of just shoot across downtown really fast because the trains are coming. You have actually 2 different lines converging on the transit mall on 7th Avenue. And you get a train basically every 2 minutes, so it's really fabulous. Also has a +15 Skyway network, so these bridges run between each building, and these come in handy more in the winter when it gets kind of frigid out. But for the most part, the sidewalks are very vibrant, except when it's a little bit cold.
Let's not import that.
Probably don't need it. Probably don't need it here. Calgary also has a Stephen Avenue promenade was put in 20 years ago. It is the most vibrant retail street that Calgary has. It is closed to auto traffic pretty much 15 hours of the day. There's a few hours in the evening where they do allow cars onto it. It's really more for taxis. There's a lot of clubs and evening activities that go on, so it's kind of a different animal, different beast, but immensely popular. And it runs basically to City Hall in the background to a bunch of historic shopping areas. So getting into the mobility aspects, when I got there, there was no on-street bike infrastructure. They hired me because they wanted to do that. What they already had was very popular river pathways. So picture having the loop already, but nothing in between that. And so that was kind of the situation that I walked into. And the pathway system was awesome. It just didn't get to all the destinations. And so here's an example of some of the infrastructure that existed before I got there. They had one part-time bike lane on a key east-west street that was part-time because they allowed parking during the middle hours of the day. And then during rush hour, it would go one direction, and then in the other rush hour, it would go the other direction. And so it was very, very awkward. The city had a solution to deal with the cars that were still parked there, and there was literally 10 tow trucks lined up, like right at 4 o'clock, to tow these guys from the bike lane. Okay, that's responsive, but it's not really a great facility. But most of the streets look like this. Like you just had to take the lane. No fun, not on a busy street. When you got outside of the downtown, you had, a lot of sharrows or just simple signage and, kind of underutilized parking. So I started like, okay, maybe there's an opportunity to consolidate that parking. But that was kind of what I started with. And of course, Calgary had the worst ridership. Like if you take the Canadian census numbers, 1.3%. We were even below Edmonton, which is like rivalry city, not good. Only really Vancouver and Victoria were doing a good job moving cyclists at the time. So lo and behold, the council adopted the cycling strategy policy, 50 actions to make the city bike friendly, education, money for operations and maintenance, and also money for more planning work, but most importantly, money for infrastructure. They were ready to build. I was the first one hired. We also hired an engineer and an education planner. And then there was a 51st action that a wise council member decided to throw in as this strategy was getting adopted, and it was to create a network of downtown cycle tracks. And so that was a very fun project. But it wasn't going to be easy. While we had political support, there was skepticism widespread across Calgary. Editorials in both the major newspapers would consistently come out, rail against the effort. I was in for a tough ride. But we decided to build, as sort of a test, the first protected cycle track. And this went from basically the Peace Bridge, which I had the red bridge that was in the previous picture, several blocks to another bikeway that just had sharrows. And we're like, okay, let's try it. And so very supportive council member said, let's go all the way with this thing. No sharrows, no painted bike lanes, fully protected like they do in Montreal. And this is a Montreal design. Vancouver also was doing it. We did it fairly well and basically doubled the number of people cycling. And even in winter, which I know there's some skeptics, because I face them all the time in Calgary, people do ride in winter. In fact, there's more people riding in winter with this thing snow cleared than there were people riding it before in the summertime. So if you build it, they will come, but you do have to maintain it. So that 7th Street, if you could see, that's the blue line leading up to the Peace Bridge. That Peace Bridge was put in just a couple years before the cycle track. And so this is going to be a common theme of this, but getting across natural barriers is a big deal. And when you can provide access and more crossings, you'll get more ridership. It does take an investment. The Peace Bridge was a $25 million investment, but it's had so many people crossing it. It's done so much good. But anyways, where I was going with this is we built the first cycle track, but that network that I talked about that we were directed to build, we started building off of that and said, okay, so if we have the river paths and that 7th Street, what can we do next? And we started identifying other corridors that looked viable for cycle tracks. And this is the plan that we came up with, and it's pretty good. Didn't interrupt car traffic too much, which was a concern of a lot of people. And it was just one corridor during a 16-hour public hearing with council that they said they couldn't quite tolerate. So the one with the X's got nixed, but all the rest got the green light. And this was an all-at-once network that really no city has quite done since, except for maybe Barcelona. We put the network in all at once in 2015. So protected lanes, nothing too fancy. We were supposed to do it cheap, $5-6 million project, but 6 kilometers of this went in instantly, and we saw instant success. So at the underpass where the Fish Street, which is kind of the key north-south, this is what it looked like. And when we hit 1 million, we were kind of watching the automated counters. When it hit 1 million riders, we did a little celebration with the advocates there. Balloon arch, it was great. Happy to say they're probably, it hit 2 million, hit 3 million, so the ridership keeps on growing on this corridor and on the network. At the same time, I was working on the downtown project. I was also working with my staff. How can we make these improvements beyond city center and the downtown? How do we connect out to kind of the inner ring suburbs? Because that's where a lot of people that work downtown, they live, and they just need to have better connectivity. So this is an example of a corridor just outside of downtown in the northeast, and just a quick before-after. So this was put in. Community loved it. Just had a little bit of a road diet. Take away one travel lane and end up with this. Further up, north of downtown by a couple miles, there's an existing bike lane that was pretty popular, kind of a trunk line going up into the north part of the city. We did a corridor study, looked at the intersection, looked at the whole corridor, and ended up making some improvements that look like this. Not protected, but the key thing is we made the intersection a lot safer. So if you notice, this is a hallmark of Calgary. They have these channelized slip lanes. Cars can basically maintain full speed when they go around them. Not the safest thing to cross as a pedestrian. So we got rid of that one, got rid of several actually in Calgary. One thing I really detest about living in Canada about is these things they call maze gates. And so they are on every walkway or pathway. And the engineers love to put them there because they keep cyclists from flying through. Well, okay, they do that, check. But they also keep people walking from being able to get safely through, or people in a wheelchair from being able to get through. So this was one right by the university that I eyeballed and said, we have to remove this. Had to do a long pilot, get several approvals from traffic engineers, but eventually got to the point where we removed all the stuff and people could get through without having to. And the nice thing was, or actually the worst thing about this was, when you have these gates, you can't actually get a snowplow. You can't, whether you have a big one, a small one, you cannot get it down there. So people just end up walking on and compressing the snow. Actually met a lady who had broken her ankle at this very site. So anyways, I became a champion of that and was able to eventually get the city to actually commit to removing all of them, and they have hundreds of them in the city. Going back to the natural barriers, the Bow River is a great amenity, and the pathway is a great amenity, but it's lacking safe, accessible crossings. But the good news is, $50 million later, the city put in 2 crossings, and so it's really just about providing more options to people and improving connectivity. And if you build it, people absolutely do come and use these. Of course, it does take good maintenance. Calgary gets about 7 snow dumps per year. Sometimes they're just little bits and they can use a brush, like a brush machine, like the picture on the upper left, kind of clear that snow away. People can keep riding. Or sometimes they break out the Bobcat or a vehicle with a big plow and they push the snow away. But the key thing is to maintain it. If you could do that, that'll keep people riding year round. Also did a lot of communications. As I mentioned, there were a lot of skeptics, so we would do improvements. We'd constantly be talking to the public about how we made the things better. So that's a very important aspect of the job. And then bylaws. They're not called bylaws here. I'm not sure what they're really called, but we modified a couple. One learning I got from the Netherlands was they actually, besides making giving pedestrians the right-of-way at intersections, they also give cyclists the right-of-way at intersections. So whenever you see these elephant's feet markings in Canada, that means cyclists have the right-of-way. And then, at least in Calgary, we actually changed the bylaw to acknowledge that. And then made a fine. I think it's $200 or $300 if you fail to yield to a bicyclist in one of these cross rides. So getting to some of the lessons from Canada, not just from my time in Calgary, but also working in Metro Vancouver, it's really important to separate users by the speed that they travel. And so pedestrians obviously are going the slowest. Then you have people cycling, and there's actually a pretty large range how fast or slow people go on a micromobility device. Bicycle, e-bike, scooter. Some are going slow, some are going fast. They need their area. Needs to be also wide enough so that they're not bumping elbows with each other. And then vehicles also need their space. A big lesson learned from the downtown cycle track pilot in Calgary was that if you build it, they do come. We ended up increasing cycling trips in the downtown by about 80%. And so you can kind of see on this chart, because we had really good data from the automated counters, the Peace Bridge went in here, later the cycle track network went in. So each one of these investments, we saw a little bit of a bump, and actually a pretty big bump with the cycle tracks themselves. And so what that did on the whole in the downtown was cycling is the fastest growing mode. So you're seeing the most growth that way, and then walking is also super popular. Transit also super popular. But the more important numbers actually on this slide, I know it's busy. Calgary's gotten their downtown traffic. Vehicles went from 73% 20 years ago to about 54%. So they're blowing away their citywide targets. This is obviously downtown, denser, a lot more activities, a lot more density, but It is easier, faster to come by transit or bike than it is to drive, especially when you factor in parking. Another lesson, and I probably don't need to tell this to this crowd, but separate whenever possible. It is not cool when you tell kids to take just take this bike lane and try to get to school safely. Same thing, I even struggle with bike boulevards on some of them, trying to get kids to the school. You really need to do something more robust in and around these vehicles that weigh 4,000 or 5,000 pounds. Monitoring was a big thing in Calgary because obviously we had a lot of skeptics, so we were constantly communicating out and collecting data and then communicating out how the progress is going. Similar to Tucson has a map showing the census tracts, and when you get to the east side, it's like less than 1% cycling. We have the same thing going on in Calgary, but the cool thing is, following the improvements that we did in the urban core and the downtown and just on the edges of it, we saw immediately surges where people were starting to cycle more. So that was very promising. Probably the more important thing I want to stress, though, is the impact that the red line, the light rail, has had on Calgary neighborhoods. You're starting, I lived in a neighborhood that was still single family. They were kind of entrenched as that. They're probably not going to see a lot of changes, but there's other neighborhoods where it's more viable, a lot easier to make change happen. So this is just east of downtown, less than a kilometer away from downtown, actually. And this is there's a light rail with a station here that comes into downtown over there. And what you see here is the old hospital site. So this hospital had served its need, its purpose, probably built 100 years ago. They decided to tear it down. They built a new one on another street a couple miles away. But then, what to do with this land? And it's been a slow change, 20, 30 years from when this area was taken. But there's been a lot of change since. So that site has come down. They've replaced it with kind of a central park area, and then established First Avenue as a main street. And what you're seeing is a lot more density, a lot more people living in this area. And then another street coming down to the station with mid-rise towers, I'll call them. And it's just really changed the vibe of this area. And density doesn't have to be scary. I mean, this is affordable housing for Calgary. People will, if they want the urban life, this is great because they can walk, bike, take the train to work, and not have to deal with snow on the sidewalk. Somebody takes care of that when you live in a big building like that. So this same neighborhood, these are some images of what it looks like now. It's not scary density. It's a variety of 2-3-story buildings going on up to about 6 or 7. And so it's quite attractive to be there and very walkable. The other thing that Calgary's really good at is thinking outside the box. Post-COVID, I mentioned there was 160,000 employees, tons of office towers. A lot of them were sitting vacant after COVID. And so what the city did is said, well, we have this housing problem, like a lot of cities. What if we converted some of those buildings, the suitable ones, into residential buildings? And so they've got 40-odd projects now that they are converting. It's not just the city. Obviously, development is on board with this, but they're working together to convert some of those buildings so that more people can live downtown. And so another lesson from Canada, and I'm pretty proud of this project on the right. Actually, this is before, after. Sorry, I've got too many pictures on this slide. So at my current job in Coquitlam, which is on the eastern edge of Metro Vancouver, we took a facility that was really underwhelming from a cyclist point of view and made it a complete street. And so that is the same bus stop, except we managed to shrink down the road and put in a raised cycle track. And raised cycle tracks are the best. This is what you see in the Netherlands. As long as you do them wide enough and you have adequate separation from people walking, people driving, it is the gold standard. It costs a little bit more, but gosh, does it feel good when you ride? The stress levels come way down. Here's a couple more pictures from the same project. I know people, Canada also, I've mentioned LRT a few times. Calgary does it really well. They also do BRT. The key things to know, like, they both can be very good. They both serve their purpose that they can move high volumes of people. The key difference is, I think the BRT is better suited when you have established areas already existing and a high demand for transit ridership. You could just funnel those people onto a bus, shoot them down, it's a little bit cheaper. But if you're looking for something more robust and you have the opportunity to redevelop the land, you want to see a higher degree of, higher mix of housing, more redevelopment, the LRT might be a better solution. And if you do the LRT, you can end up with situations like this. This is Brentwood in Burnaby, Brentwood Station. Burnaby is a bedroom community of Vancouver. Lots of single-family houses still to this day, but wherever they put the stations in with the Vancouver Light Rail project that went in for I think it was the '86 World Expo, to see all the land use changes, starting to see the fruits of all that was planted many years ago. So Vancouver's very spatially limited. So you're seeing a lot of 20, 30-story towers going in, some high rises. People find that to be more affordable than the alternative because you can buy one of these, like a unit, like 1,000 square foot for about $700,000, which is not cheap, but it costs about $2 million to buy a single family house. So, which prices out virtually everybody who's not rich. If you've lived there for 20 years and have one of those, you're sitting on a lot of money, a lot of equity, but for everybody else, they don't have too many choices. So Vancouver's choosing to grow up and focusing in that density in and around the SkyTrain stations. So Vancouver's LRT is a little bit different than the Calgary one. It's all grade separated, run on automated trains. And those automated trains shoot you past traffic going about 80 to 90 kilometers an hour. Sorry, 50 miles. About 50 miles an hour between the stations. It's so fast, so lovely. It is the best system. Vancouver does transit so well. When you're down at the local level, there's many communities that just have main streets where the bus comes like every 5 to 10 minutes. So it's also a city with very fast, frequent ridership, transit service and ridership. My point about this slide, though, was to talk about the density. The architecture really comes in many shapes and sizes. It's really just getting the development community on board with doing things different. But this example down at the bottom is also quite lovely. It's a laneway product near another SkyTrain station in Vancouver. And this is more of a townhouse, but townhouses run about $800,000-900,000. So again, not cheap, but far cheaper than what the market's providing in a traditional single-family house. Okay, so I want to get to some observations about Tucson. You know, I'm a Tucsonan. You guys know that. I grew up here, and I obviously spent some time away from Tucson, and it's helped shape my perspective. But this drives me crazy every time. I mean, I read the news, and what is the news talking about? Oh, there's a new drive-through on Broadway. Okay, great. I'm not sure we needed another one, but that's what they're talking about. That's what the market's providing. But if we keep building like this, we are never going to have fast, frequent, reliable transit. We're never going to have an environment that's walkable. And it's going to be challenging to bike, of course, too. And everybody will just be dependent on that car. You will not shake Tucson has. Clearly, the automobile is going to be always be part of Tucson's DNA, but it doesn't have to be developed like this everywhere. Broadway is a great corridor. I keep looking at it going, boy, if Park Place Mall or Tucson Mall, or not Tucson Mall, but Elcon could just redevelop in a logical way, like that could be such a good node system where at Wilmot you've got maybe a station and a node where you got some denser activities happening. So anyways, the land use is a problem, and this type of development is not helping anything. Unless you want to get a coffee. But funny thing is, when you're in Vancouver, like on one of these main streets that are completely walkable, you got a coffee shop, a grocery store. It's such a nice alternative to this type of life. Transit. How do you get to fast, frequent, reliable? Tucson's got a long way to go. It's got a stable transit system, but it's a service that's not used by very many people currently because the service is just not frequent enough. The land use has to be transformed, and maybe it's not everywhere, but on key corridors. So pick a corridor that's going to be really good, maybe to start planning for that future. Make sure the land use plan and the transportation plan are aligned so that when the applications come in, you can start to direct them to a better product. Transit has to be really fast, really frequent, or else people won't use it. So the bar in Vancouver, Calgary is 10 minutes or less. So that's something to shoot for. Of course, you have to have funding to pay for it, so that's a key thing. And then on these key corridors where you really want people to use transit, you gotta have, you need to prioritize the transit rider over the other modes. And so that could mean a bus-only lane, or it could mean like a grade-separated facility, either bus or light rail. So that costs money, but you will see such better service. I would say when you do something like this, when you do the planning, don't forget about people on the south side and east side, north side, because you want them to be able to use this option. And what Calgary and Vancouver do, honestly, at the edges, they provide park and rides. Park and rides are expensive. You got to put it in a parkade, surface parking lots. That's valuable space at a train station. If you talk to some urbanists, they'll say that's bad practice, but it's kind of a gateway. Like you have to bring them on board. They want to know, can they actually use that service? And maybe you can't go all the way down Broadway to Harrison with, light rail, but maybe you can provide a place where they can drive to and get on board so that they can take the train and not have the stress of driving. So I think I've mentioned this a few times. You need to have synergy between your land use and transportation plans. Develop them in tandem, have a vision, create some targets that will help direct that'll help make it accountable to the city, and you should be able to see progress. It's not going to happen right away. Obviously, Calgary is now starting to see the fruits of its labor from 1988 when they opened up that first red line. You're starting to see the transit-oriented development nodes start to take off. And so there's some select ones that have higher land use intensities, and all kinds of tower and redevelopment are going up into those spaces. And it's so awesome to see some of the shopping malls of yesteryear. They're getting redeveloped, and it usually starts with taking the surface parking lots, and you start to see some towers pop up, or higher density housing. And then eventually they deal with the mall, or they incorporate the mall into the node. But that progress is happening. That type of redevelopment is happening there. Regional rail. If you're gonna do some more transportation planning and you wanna make sure that you have it well connected, if you wanna have a regional transit network, it's gotta have a strong regional rail component. Every city should be thinking about this. Every region should be thinking about it. Every state should. It's pretty slow in the US. I know ADOT has done some studies over the years, like every 10 years they redo the study and it never gets anywhere for building rail to, from Tucson to Phoenix. But I think it's completely viable. You know, what if you had a line that went up to Phoenix? What if it connected down to Sahuarita? What if it had a stop in Marana, a couple of stops along the way, of course, downtown? It's a no-brainer. Yeah, you could go farther. Passenger service down, yeah. Obviously, China built a high-speed rail network in about 10 years, so it really just takes the political will and funding.
Isn't it true that the two cities are actually merging?
Which two?
Tucson and Phoenix. All the development in between?
There is a lot of development still happening between that, but they've been talking about that for decades, but there's still a lot of land in between. But that's a potential, like as that area, if you did build regional rail and you had a couple key stations along the way, Pinal County could be like Arizona City, which is right in between. Like imagine that, like becoming a node and redeveloping. So you could do some amazing stuff. You just need to have this solidified in a plan and then each jurisdiction to get on board. I don't think you should wait for the Moranas to suggest this or the state. I think you'll be waiting forever. But if this was part of Tucson, like the regional transportation plan here, or even the city's plan, I think it needs a strong proponent. But you know, you could see from my slides of Calgary, it doesn't have to be always off to the side, like in a grand station type thing. It could also be above the highway. Like it's kind of, you got to make it work however you can. I'm a big proponent of regional rail because once you have a system started, like Phoenix has its light rail system, like imagine that you could go to Phoenix, get off at one station, hop on the light rail. You could do probably 80% of what you could do by car, as long as they keep building out their network. Is that inconsistent lighting standards, lack of investment? Somebody else say, have a good answer? Dark skies consideration.
Marking the streets signs are striping or disappearing.
Yes, so yeah, the lack of lighting leads to all kinds of issues. You know, it might be beneficial to the wildlife and astronomers, but if you're just trying to move safely across the city, it puts you in a very vulnerable state. Of course, it's contrasted by this ATM I saw in a shopping center not too far away, where it had like super lighting and you know, nobody could miss that. So I'm just like, you needs to be consistent on corridors, and you know, not only just for each mode to see each other, but it's also for potholes. The pavement in Tucson is not perfect, we know that. There was just a cyclist killed in Portland a few days ago from hitting a pothole at night. This is not fun stuff you want to play around with. If I were in charge of the transportation plan or the next RTA, I'd say, okay, what about the streetlights? Automated cameras, Tucson used to have it. Became a kind of political liability. People accused it of being a cash grab. It's not really cash grab if the money's going to the right places, but the more important thing is it saves lives. So I would encourage Tucson to look at restarting this program. It's got proven benefits and it works across the world. And you will see the fatality rate drop here. Almost done. I mentioned the loop. I got to say I'm on it constantly when I'm out for about this time of year. I have my e-bike. I live on the east side with my parents, and I cruise around a lot. I know the city's working on an east side bike boulevards plan. I hope you all take a look at that, provide input if you live on the east side or travel over there. But I can't help but wonder if the bike boulevard network is not going to be able to solve the real problem over there. You cannot bike from the east side to Midtown unless you want to get on Broadway or Speedway. Very scary places to ride. That Speedway crossing of the Pantano, right by the busy Walmart, not fun to cycle through. What if you had, in between these major roads, crossings, new bridges, just like the one they have on the retail at Mountain. You know, cross over. It'll make that network more permeable, and you'll probably be able to get the east side. You'd provide them with a realistic option to bike into the rest of the city.
How old is that photo?
2 days. This one? Yep. So yeah, some other criticisms of the loop. I mean, it's really a recreation facility, but it has the potential to be so much more. You got to legalize nighttime riding. Of course, like, it gets dark early in December, so if you want to get home, it's still the best choice, even though it's dark, to ride on versus some of the other busy streets. But it could use some lighting. I know that's, you know, also a challenge, but there's pathway lights, there's ways to do it so that it's less intrusive, invasive, but does give you a sense of safety. Almost done here. Bike boulevards, I'm obviously very passionate about it, got things started with it. I do think they could be better. Some of the stuff that Canada's doing with bike boulevards, they're making sure the pavement surfaces are really smooth, making sure that you have more robust treatments when you get to schools. So you don't want to just tell the kids to take a lane and say good luck. That might work for an adult who's pretty confident, but for the kids, you need to do more robust protected treatments. You also need to make sure to get the traffic volumes down. And so there's a couple examples of how Vancouver's been treating some of the bike boulevards there. Sometimes they do it very on the cheap, which is understandable. Once in a while, you'll see a more robust treatment like the rain garden on the left, and that, you know, few $100,000 that they spent there kind of creates a park, creates this better space for people to congregate, as well as make it more bike ped friendly. And then, of course, you know, lighting. A lot of the bike boulevards are very dark. You can't see the potholes, so that's something that I hope the city can take into account more when they're doing the design processes, but it might have to be in a future iteration of the bike boulevard improvements. And of course, shade. That's something that you don't have enough of in Tucson, so we need more street trees. Real quick, protected bike lanes and pathways. Really impressed with what the city's doing on collector streets and on a couple other corridors. So Kenyon is on the bottom left. I think that was installed a few months ago. Looks really good. I rode on the Arroyo Chico last week. Phenomenal. I know, I don't think Julie Perzak's here, but when I was planning the bike boulevard network, she was planning the greenways, and sometimes we battled, like, okay, who's gonna get this street? What are we gonna do on it? This one ended up really good. I love how it's raised. From the automobile realm, the car is the visitor, the bikes kind of take more center stage. You can't see it very well, but it's actually raised about 6 inches up from the road with a rolled curb. Really good street lighting. This is one of the premier facilities I've seen in Tucson. Check it out if you haven't seen it. And with that, I'll wrap up. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Tom. We're gonna transition here. You know, the lessons you're sharing make me think, what could Tucson look like if we applied some of these ideas here, minus the snow? And of course, you know, Tucson also have our own context to consider. And, you know, over the past 2 decades, we've made progress. We have our bike boulevards, we have pedestrian improvements, some transit expansion, but our streets are still too dangerous. Transit options are still really limited, and many areas still lack safe, walkable connections. And that means the decisions we make now about the next 20 years is really critical. So that brings us to our next topic of discussion, RTA Next, also known as Propositions 418 and 419, which will be on the ballot this March, so very soon. This is a regional plan, right? It includes multiple jurisdictions and guides how billions of dollars will be spent over the next 2 decades, covering roads, transit, sidewalks, and bike infrastructure throughout Pima County. And so when I think about 20 years, I think about my 7-year-old who cannot vote on this plan, but will inherit it in many ways. So to help us connect these lessons from other cities and with Tucson's reality, I'm also thrilled to welcome our two panelists along with to join us with Tom Moss, a Tucson native with a master's in planning from the University of Arizona. She's served on the RTA Citizen Advisory Committee, which was convened to develop the RTA Next plan, and we'll share some high-level insights from a community perspective and somebody who's been following the issue now for some time. And Albert Elias, also a Tucson native, city planner and former public administrator who also brings a wealth of institutional knowledge and insights into planning, equity, and community priorities. So together with Tom, they're gonna help us explore these challenges and opportunities as Tucson considers our next 20 years. So I wanna welcome you all to come take a seat. Okay. So the way that we're gonna set up this conversation is as a guided panel. So I have questions prepared for our panelists, sort of thematic questions: safety, transit, and governance. And then we'll have some space for audience questions as well. So with that, let's open up. So, okay, you all have your notes. Okay, so first theme that I want to touch on is safety. You know, as an advocate, this is top of mind for me. Traffic deaths and serious injuries in Tucson have been rising. And even if you're not following this issue closely like I am, I think even for the general public, there is a growing sense of awareness that our streets just don't feel safe. We see headline after headline of crashes and fatalities, not just within the city, but throughout the county. So my first question to our panelists is, you know, what does it mean to prioritize safety in a place like Tucson, in the greater metro area? You know, and when it comes to the regional plan that we have before us, RTA Next, you know, how does that approach safety, and what would a safety first plan look like in practice? So, I don't know, Tom, since you're to my right, maybe you want to kick us off with some thoughts.
I feel like I've alluded to some of the things I've probably already shown some of the things that I'd like to say. I think if you know where you want where you're having the greatest issues, you could probably come up with some targeted solutions. If you're worried about pedestrians crossing the roads, it's easy to focus on the crossings and make them better. What I think is really needed, though, is a more holistic approach to complete streets. And so I know the city has a good policy, but retrofitting those and getting the investments so that you can actually rebuild the streets and rebuild them right, so that they're not just barely functional where you've got the stripes or flexible delineators to demarcate a protected bike lane, but rebuild the streets so that you have a more attractive environment. Like, think of the image I provided of Coquitlam, where we took the existing space for bikes and then did a raised bike lane by kind of shrinking the road a little bit. You end up with such a better product, something that people can be really proud of. And I think if you ended up with a more systematic way of retrofitting the streets, you know, you don't have to end up with like Speedway in the condition that it's in for decade upon decade. It doesn't have to be a road widening. Like in the RTA plan, I think widening is mentioned 23 times. Okay, that might fix somebody's commute on the edge, but when you're in this city, you just want those streets to be a little bit healthier and more complete.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Albert, do you have some thoughts to share?
Of course. So I agree with what Tom said. A more holistic approach is necessary. And I think part of our challenge as a community, as just people who live here, is to understand that different people perceive safety in different ways. And everybody in this room is a user of our transportation system. So ask yourself, do you feel safe? Now, you don't need to answer, raise your hand, or anything like that. Just hold that in yourself for a minute and think about what that means if you're a pedestrian or a bicyclist or a child or a person in a mobility device or a person who is driving a 4,000-pound automobile. I drive a 4,000-pound automobile, full disclosure. But my point is that safety is going to feel incredibly different depending on how you're interacting with our transportation system. And I believe that's something we need to prioritize. And I don't think it has been, to be perfectly honest. My last comment on this is to just think about all the billions of dollars we've spent over the last 20 years. There's some good things in there, don't get me wrong. But think about, after that amount of expenditure, how do you feel? Do you feel safer? Do you feel we've improved in a way that we've gotten value from our dollar? Just think about that.
Love that, Albert. I was also an East Side kid, Tom. I grew up near Houghton and 22nd Street. And when RTA 1 passed, I was, I think, in middle school. And so I'm very much thinking about that and remember a road that near between Harrison and Houghton on 22nd that still hasn't been completed from RTA 1. So I remember traveling there as a kid. There's a Target that got put on. The best thing I could do in Tucson on the east side was go to a Target, and I would kind of have this tiny little shoulder to, bike, and sometimes it would get washed out after a rain, and it was just very unsafe. And I still see it 20 years later, and when I go out and visit my mom, that condition hasn't changed. And as a member of the CAC, we were tasked with providing a recommendation to the RTA board, and it was a really fraught process. It was very complicated, and I would say the plan today is not. The plan today, what we're seeing was not really developed by us. What I was looking back at my numbers on the planned effort related to safety, and noticed that RTA 1, about less than 10%, about 9% of that budget was allocated to safety. And anybody have a guess of how much is allocated to safety, the safety category in RTA Next? 9%, no change. So I think it really just stood out to me of this is these things are not, there's not a progressive change in this. We're getting a little bit more of the same with this plan. I've had a lot of conversation about this, and people highlight that some of the roads, they have multimodal features, and really what that means is we get treatment like Broadway that we see with striped bike lanes, and so that's multimodal. And so to me, one of the big conversations that we had on the CAC was concern that we weren't pushing the envelope enough with RTA Next, and that we really needed to have more, somebody put it really well, that we really needed to have radical transformation of dollars and where we put it. And I've heard the mayor say this. I hear a lot of elected people say this, that the budget is a moral document. And so if you want to really change transit, safety, all these investments, we want to see things that are in Calgary's doing, we got to show that in the numbers and how this $2.67 billion package is getting allocated.
Thank you for those insights. One of the things that occurs to me that from your presentation, Tom, was these targets around shifting modes. And one thought that occurs to me is what if we had targets as a region to improve safety, and what that would look like if that was dictated by investment, right? And so just thinking about sort of the regional approach to that. Transit is something that is also a hot topic in our community, and something that you touched on a lot, Tom, in your presentation. For Tucsonans, it's highlighted as a core strategy in Move Tucson and the Climate Action Plan, which are really, guiding documents that have seen robust community engagement. And I'm curious if y'all could share, what would it mean to really, truly center transit in a regional plan, and how might RTA Next measure up to that standard? Mas, I don't know if you want to go ahead and start since you have the mic.
I could do that. One thing I like to say is that when you go to the Arizona revised statute that enables RTA to exist, that the only required element of the plan is transit. Everything else is optional. And however, in the plan, less than 30% of it is going to transit. And, I think that kind of, to me, shows it's not really centering transit. It's not focusing on what it's mandated to do by Arizona statute. And, when I was in school, the streetcar was getting built, and there was a lot of buzz about what this was going to do, how it might impact our community in positive and negative ways. And that was a really good project, and we've seen a lot of benefits and good things come out of it in our community. One thing that I'm concerned about in RTA Next is that we don't have another light rail line in this plan. There's potential for a BRT, but it's only partially funded, and it's contingent on federal funding coming through. So to me, I just get really concerned about thinking forward to another 20 years when I'll be in my 50s, and yeah, don't laugh, Albert. It's gonna happen. It's gonna happen. And thinking about what will we really have in our community, and will we be able to look like places like Calgary that did start, and how far behind we're falling if with this kind of package. Sorry, half-baked thought.
So I want to ask you to think about transit in maybe a little different way, because the transit conversations we're having in Tucson right now are fraught. So let's think about it in a little different way. And the way I'm going to ask you to think about it kind of relates to some of the things Tom said. Think about transit as a more high-capacity way to get people from one place to the next. Some people might call that living car-free, especially if they feel like they can walk in addition to taking transit, or maybe bike in addition to taking transit. Some people call that living car-free. I believe that the United States, we're proud to be driving a car, right? But I think part of that is it's luring us into this perception that there are not people interested in living car-free or nearly car-free lifestyles. And I believe that is what is happening in this country right now. There's a researcher at ASU, a woman named Nicole Corcoran, I believe, and she just did this really interesting study about people's attitude toward living car-free. And they have an interest in it. And the thing that's interesting about this study to me is that they surveyed people all over the country, and she found that 18% are definitely interested in living car-free, and that an additional 40% are open to the idea. And that doesn't even count the 10% of people in the survey who don't have a car. They're already walking, they're already biking or taking. So the reason I mention this is a couple reasons. One is that I think there's a movement and a great interest in this country to live more car-free lifestyle, or near to it. And I think that we've tried to put transit in a little box, and I'll say it. People have said transit's for poor people. I don't want to do that. And I don't believe that's the case. I don't believe that's the case in Tucson, and I don't believe that's the case in the United States. I think it's starting to change. So here's my point. Public transit's challenge is not that people have a bad attitude. It's that it doesn't work for them. If it could get them to and from the places they want, they're going to use it. And I think Tom illustrated that really effectively in his presentation. So I guess I'll just conclude by saying this challenge regarding transit is something that we can measure and we can change. We just have to have the willingness to do it.
Yeah, I'll just add that, I think the shining example from RTA1 is the streetcar project. And so I see you back there, Jim. Jim Glock, who is my director at City of Tucson, a real champion of the streetcar, got it done. That's, 4 miles long, but it's serving 10% of Tucson's transit ridership. A lot of us were skeptics thinking that's not going to move people, but it is moving people because people love rail. It's in the right place, like between downtown and the U of A. But, I look at the next RTA plan and I'm wondering, okay, what's going to be the connection to that? It doesn't have to be streetcar because we know it's painfully slow. So that may not be the solution for a Broadway or another corridor, but obviously light rail, especially if it's grade separated or has its own lanes, or BRT, can move fastly and really move people. The key is it's got to be attractive. It's got to be not just like when you look around the physical environment. Yes, it has to be attractive, but it also needs to inspire people to want to leave the car behind. Like, they're going to have a need to use that car, for many trips, but there may be trips where they're like, oh, I'm just going to head downtown, down Broadway, hop on the train. It's a lot easier, less stress than driving. And so you just need to have those connections to the streetcar network, and hopefully it includes regional rail, so that you can get out to the edges a little bit easier.
Can I add one last comment? That Tom made me think about this, and he brought it up, but I want to reinforce it, especially in the context of this particular topic, transit. Our way of creating transportation improvement plans is totally disconnected from our decision-making regarding land use. This is a huge problem. And if we ever want to give people the opportunity to use different modes of transportation other than the car, we need to get much more serious about the processes that we use to create our transportation plans and to create our land use plans. And not just the plans, the decisions. When we make a decision about a transportation investment, and when we make a decision about a land use investment, because that's what the property owner's counting on, is a decision, we need to take into consideration, what are we trying to achieve? What's the goal? And make that an explicit part of our evaluation of our transportation investments and our land use decisions.
Yeah.
I wanna do that now.
You may, Mas.
Thank you. Kind of building on that, I think there's a neat study that came out of the U of A recently. One of the professors at the College of Architecture and Planning. It's going to be published in the Harvard Law Policy Review, and he did an analysis of like what does it really look like to have capture the benefit, and it was in the context of fare free transit and on the streetcar too, and what it was like some incredible stat of like there was 188% return on investment. So like when we got away with fares, there was the sales tax collected in that area increased 188% because of ridership increasing. There's economic activity. Think about all the small businesses that are along there. This really has tremendous economic impact on our community, and it just seems very common sense to me to want to focus on investing on that for the next 20 years and expanding that out to all parts of town. And I think, you know, it's not just a downtown issue, and you know, it's an East Side issue. It's a Marana. Like people all over need to get around. They care. And we live so much as a product of what we can afford. And so we need to make sure that transit is reaching all of these places and that those benefits are realized.
One thing that I will add to the conversation, because at LSA, a lot of what we do is engaging community members. And you know, a lot of when we think about transit as advocates, we think about economic growth. And one sort of seed I will also plant is challenging the way we think about economic growth and economic mobility. When we were doing our outreach for the Complete Streets policy, there was one story that really resonated with me. And it was a young girl that we were working with through our Safe Routes to School program. And she shared her story of her mother, who worked a couple different jobs. She cleaned houses. Her dad was in construction, and she went to Rincon High School. And she's like, I have a really hard time doing all of the recreational activities that I need to pad my resume to get into college. And I'm a first-generation college student, and it's really hard when my parents are working these long, odd hours to able to do all the things that my peers who are going to get into college and get scholarships do. And I think about that and think about how, when we think about economic development and mobility, really challenging us to, broaden the umbrella there. All right, I have one last sort of thematic question, and then we'll open it up to some audience questions. So this theme is around governance and equity. So we know that regional planning involves multiple jurisdictions, right? Funding decisions that impact who benefits the most. I'm curious, from where you're sitting, your vantage point, how can Tucson ensure that a plan is equitable, climate conscious, and responsible for community priorities?
Well, I have the mic, so.
That's how we're running it.
Well, I think that a big piece of it, especially, is making sure that representation is fair and it's representative. And one of the big topics that RTA and our region has struggled with is, like, how do you set up a voting structure with the mayors at a regional level to, one, bring everybody to the table, but then also make sure that each community is appropriately represented. Right now, for folks that aren't familiar with, the mayor of Sahuarita has the same voting power as the mayor of Tucson on the RTA board. And so, Marana or Valley, all of those all have the same voting power as the mayor, even though she represents 500,000 people versus, 60,000 people. And so I think that is a really big piece that I think is important for us to change when we're in our regional transportation planning conversations, is to ensure that the city of Tucson and all communities are appropriately represented at that decision-making table. The CAC, I'm actually a byproduct of the RTA trying to kind of make moves. The mayor she really went to bat to try to get some changes happening. And she, through that process, there was, a batch of CAC members that were added, and that was a little bit more skewed towards the Tucson group, so that we could have more say. And even then, it was still incredibly hard to move things forward for a lot of different reasons, not just because of that. But I think that was like a step in the direction of what we could. And the first thing that we did was trying to update our guiding principles as a CAC, which then introduced trying to adjust climate change, right? Trying to address safety in a different way and have complete streets. And so even like that movement, you could see where those seeds were being laid out to try to bring something different into the plan. And I don't think that the byproduct, it didn't come all the way through, but you can see how these small changes can start to change the conversations in these rooms when you just even start with the basic thing of having representative government.
So I want to build on a couple of the things that Mas said. I mean, I believe that people want to trust their leadership, right? But how do you do that? What can you do to build trust? And I think that's part of our challenge with governance and with the way people perceive equity and whether or not they've been treated fairly. So I think the whole idea that I'm trying to inform you about is we need to improve the way we engage with our community when we make these plans and we make these decisions. How do you do that? You do that by having engagement that is meaningful. And that means interacting with the segment of community that is as broad and diverse as possible. Now, don't get me wrong, I was a professional staff member for many years, and I felt my role as a professional staff member was to give my best recommendation, right? Well, sometimes it was not supported, or the leadership did not agree with that. You know what? That's okay, because we have to be responsive to this issue of trust. And we need to be able to convey to people that our leaders are hearing us. So I just want to emphasize that equity and the way we govern ourselves is completely tied to how community feedback shapes decisions. I'm going to say that again. How did community feedback shape decisions? Does it mean just informing people, or to genuinely involve diverse voices early and often in our processes? So I had a great planning mentor who said, you know, when you're engaging with the community or you're engaging with an individual, you need to really listen to them. You need to really focus in on. And you know what else you need to do? You need to think about the voices that are not in the room. They are the people you need to listen to as well. So again, I'm not criticizing professional people. Our engineers, our planners, our elected officials, they're doing the best they can. But if you really want to build trust in the community, then you need to engage with a diverse number of voices and do it in an authentic way. And I think we've come up way short in that regard.
Just add a couple points. When I brought up the Calgary 1/3 sustainable target, that is not a very high bar. Why? Because about 1/3 of the population doesn't have a driver's license. At least in Metro Vancouver, various studies have proven that between the young, the old, and people that just don't want it, they're choosing to live or can't live. They're living by other means. They're dependent on transit, walking, using their own wheels to get around. I think that those both up, and I think that's sort of what you were mentioning with the U of A student. Like, they just need better options at the end of the day. And if we can provide that, I'll just sort of paraphrase Gil Penalosa, who is the original ciclovia started in Bogota, and he was the leader of that back in the day. So there's great videos of him, and he runs an organization now in Toronto called 8 to 80 Cities. And his theory is, if you can design for the 8-year-old and the 80-year-olds, everything else will just happen. Like, so if you design your cities better that way, they'll be more equitable, inclusive, vibrant, etc.
Some of you might remember when Gil came to Tucson in 2017. We're doing great on time, y'all, so now we have some time to take your questions. And what I'm going to ask is if you can raise your hand, and I'm going to repeat your question because we're live streaming, and I want to make sure we capture the question for those who are maybe tuning in virtually. So I see a hand raised in the back.
Thanks. I heard from Tom that the construction of the light rail, maybe the BRT, the impetus was Expos or Olympics or something like that. How does Calgary, Vancouver fund the operations of those?
Okay, so the question is, how does Calgary, Vancouver fund the operations of the LRT and BRT?
So I know that both cities, it's typically 40 to 50% of the service operations are funded through the fare box. So people are paying anywhere from, in Calgary, I think it's $3, and you can ride from end to end, make as many connections as you want within 90 minutes. Vancouver has more of a staged length system where you pay by how many zones that you travel in. So it's anywhere from $3 to $5 basically. So, you know, when you get to a point where you have kind of a world-class transit system, people will gladly pay that much money for that service. Honestly, it boggles my mind a little bit how much young people will pay for an Uber ride late at night, but when they don't really have a choice, that's what they got to do, is like fork out $20 for that ride across town.
I see a question here.
I'm curious, I guess, in terms of like the RTA Next plan. One, I guess it sounds like if we're interested in a complete streets approach, we should likely be looking to advocate against this being passed, correct? Like, is that sort of like, I guess I'm trying to understand sort of from like, and feeling like I have steps to take after this evening, like that plan doesn't represent what I'm potentially interested in seeing more complete streets. But what would happen, I guess, one, if we advocated against this and it doesn't get passed, and then two, like what happens in going back to the drawing board, I guess, and revising the plan?
So I'm going to repeat the question.
Sorry,
So I think the question is, what happens if RTA Next fails?
And like, how can, if it isn't addressing complete streets, how can we today start advocating against that getting passed?
And is RTA Next at promoting complete streets?
So I'm going to start with that one. So the mixed bag. The road projects that the city of Tucson submitted are by and large complete streets. They're called modernization in the plan, and so the city of Tucson has done that. The rest of the projects that have been submitted are, I would say, not complete streets, and so it kind of like to put that all into context. So there's, you know, everybody should definitely go and look things over, talk, have more conversations. I think where I've kind of landed with it is looking into the context of how much is Tucson represented in this plan. And if you take out the undelivered RTA 1 projects that would be cost about $250 million of this plan, and that the city of Tucson is getting less than 50% of the allocation of the RTA Next budget. And so I think kind of within that kind of puts into context of like, what are we really getting from all of this? And there are 5 or 6 traffic interchanges, so you get some interstates in there. So I think, you know, there are some good things as there was in the first one, and there, I would say proportionally though to what our region, what our Tucson represents as a region, it's not representative of that. And I also think that people in Oro Valley, Sahuarita, Marana, and Green Valley, all Vail, everybody does deserve to have complete streets no matter where you are in our community, and that you shouldn't just have to suffer a traffic interchange, you know, just because you live, you know, further out and have a longer commute. For your second question about what happens if this doesn't pass, you know, I think there's a lot of options, right? You know, there are actually all the smaller communities, because of their population size, they can at a city council meeting just pass to have a sales tax increase. So my understanding is that Sahuarita, Oro Valley, and Marana are all preparing to have, if this fails, that they would pass something like that to help fund their projects and whatever else they might want to do. Pima County, the supervisors, with a simple majority, they can also increase our property taxes, and they can allocate that funding to also pay for projects and help to pay for the undelivered projects. I think that's a big thing of, like, how do we get these projects that we were promised 20 years ago done? You know, that could be an avenue for that as a funding source. The supervisors, you know, if we could get a unanimous vote, which I think is, you know, questionable, that they can also just unilaterally, without going to the voters, increase the sales tax. The city of Tucson is a lot more constrained, my understanding, about what the city council can do as far as increasing taxes, so that would probably look like having the mayor and council sending a ballot initiative in 6 months to voters asking for, a half-cent sales tax within the city. I think it's possible. A few years ago, the city of Tucson did a pretty intensive planning effort called Move Tucson. The website still exists, and they did a lot of public engagement. Was LSA involved? I don't know. And through that, we have a plan that is in place. It probably needs to get updated a little bit, but I don't think it's like a huge lift. We're not starting from ground zero. There would be a funding gap. That's a big topic, is like, what do we do in the meantime? Because if this doesn't pass, there'll be, I think like a 9-month funding gap from RTA, if something were to pass in November, get in the ballot, pass in November. So there's like some considerations there, but again, I think there are ways that our region could really work together, put funding together, and make sure that there's a continuation of service for, our transit. And to me, I think it's worth maybe, I don't know, this is my orientation. We're committing to something for 20 years. We probably want to make sure it's right, and we should be mindful of what a year.
I'll just add one more thing real quick. As to what should I do, what if this doesn't happen? What should I do? How can I figure out and balance that when I make my decision in March when you get your ballot? So a couple of things I would say. First, study what is in the plan. Look at it very carefully. Look at the dollar amounts, look at the projects, look at the percentages of where the investment is made, and ask yourself, does that reflect what are my priorities? And if it doesn't, that might say to you that maybe we can come up with a better plan. If it does reflect your priorities, then vote yes. But if it doesn't reflect your priorities, think about another opportunity you might have to play a role in a process where we come up with a better plan. I'm kind of an optimistic person by my nature, so I always think we can do better. So again, like Ma said, it isn't that there aren't good projects in there, but the issue is, are the priorities right? Are the investments right? Are they being made in the correct places? And do they reflect my personal values? And if they don't, then think about engaging individually and with your family unit, with your neighborhood, with your friends. How can we come up with a better plan? Just think about what that means to you personally.
I saw a hand up here.
Yeah, it's a comment rather than a question, and I haven't heard water supply mentioned at all, and the image of Tucson and Phoenix growing together over the I-10 corridor, to me, is unrealistic in a 20-year period, with water becoming such an important issue. So I just wanted to add that comment, that even though water has not been mentioned tonight, it's going to be a fundamental limiting factor in our future. So.
Thank you for your comment. I saw Ann there. Yeah.
Howard, you were talking about how land use and transportation aren't really working together to create an overall large picture. You kept saying we. Who are the we? Is it the city and the county? Is it council members and city of Tucson employees? Like, who's the we in that?
Great question, Lynn. The short answer is all of the above, but let me say it starts with you and me. And this is how it works. Our elected officials are trying to be responsive to you and me. And they're trying to make good decisions for the future of our community. They want our land use decisions and our transportation decisions to be better than they have been in the past. We know that. But the problem is that we have systems in place. We have plans in place. We have ways that we're used to doing things. And all of those collectively are resulting in outcomes that we don't necessarily want. And I'll just illustrate real quick for you. And this is where it kind of takes it back to the individual level. Now, most of us live in probably in a more residential area. And we drive, or we walk, or we bike, or we take transit along these corridors that have more cars, right? And what do we see along these corridors? We see a lot of buildings, right? A lot of these are commercial buildings. And what are they? They're sitting there empty. And why are they empty? Because we have too many of them. And the retail world is changing. If you were a real nerd about this thing, you would go look at the land use and how much land we have designated for industrial use. It's the same thing. We have so much land set aside for industrial, you know, I mean, we just have too much. We're never going to use it. Same thing with the retail. We have more commercially zoned land than we're ever going to use. So what are we going to do? Do you hear anybody saying we should change that? And how creative are we being in our problem solving? Is it possible that we could identify properties that are commercially zoned that could be developed for residential use? Is that possible? Is it possible that we could identify who those property owners are and actually approach that property owner and give them an incentive to do something with their property? Now, they may own it free and clear, and all they have to do is pay taxes once a year on it, right? They don't have to worry about a tenant. They don't have to worry about any of that. But the building just sits there empty and creates no economic activity, provides no service to the community, does nothing to really enrich our lives, right? Why couldn't that land be used for something more productive? Do you think there's a housing challenge in this community? So all of this works together. And what I'm saying is that while we can blame our decision makers, we can blame our plans, and they all have a role in this, don't get me wrong, it comes down to individuals. And it's individuals who decide, you know what, I'm not going to do anything with my house. I'm going to let it fall to crap. Would you appreciate that as a neighbor? No, you wouldn't, right? And it's the same thing along our commercial corridors. We have so many of these buildings that have had zero investment in them for years and years and years. And if you're out there looking for a commercial property, are you going to go to the one that's the most poorly maintained? Heck no. So it's just going to stay there, vacant and empty, and not contributing to vibrancy in our community. So I share all this as kind of a long-winded way of saying we have choices to make as individuals, and our leaders have choices to make, but they are trying to listen to us. They are trying to create better outcomes for our community. We just need to speak up and tell them what we believe is the best thing.
Thank you, Albert.
Can I pitch one thing?
Yes.
So, like, I'm a big fan of revisiting land use transportation decisions. The Broadway corridor, like, every time I go down it, it just reeks of potential, especially with all the kind of vacant commercial land or parking lots that are along it. The Broadway corridor is unique. It helped, those businesses helped fund downtown development through the Rio Nuevo TIF, tax incremental financing that was approved. I think the plan was developed over 20 years ago. I mean, but you're seeing the fruits of that now with all the new things going in downtown. What if that district was reversed, where maybe all that downtown redevelopment that's happened is helping to subsidize redevelopment of Broadway corridor? The framework is there. You just have to kind of rejig it, and then you don't have to rely solely upon people to pay for the transit or the RTA. I mean, obviously, you're going to need more money, but that could be a way, just redirect some of the sales tax dollars.
And it's interesting to also think about how times have changed. To your earlier point, Albert, about, you know, the way we shop is different.
Right.
And I feel dated now thinking about Elcon Mall and how my Nana would take me, and it was like this a big deal to go to Elcon. Not so much these days. Alejandro.
Thanks, Vanessa. And so, first of all, as for permission to speak, because I'm going to present a different point of view. It's funny because, one, I see a lot of the things that you have mentioned, and I respect all four of you out there in front a lot, but I draw some different conclusions in some areas. So, two things. One, I'm in support of RTA. Two, I'm going to try to defend engineers everywhere, because I'm one. No, not every engineer everywhere, but there's a few things that could be food for thought. I think one key difference here in what we're talking about is being pragmatic versus visionary, right? And I think we all want to get to a point, and I've been working with LSA for 8 years because I believe in what we're trying to do. But we can't get to 50% transit and $20 for parking overnight downtown without killing all the businesses. So there's got to be a process. We got to be a little bit more patient. Another thing I see is that we are focusing a lot on engineering measures, but we really can't engineer our way out of this. I'm going to bring up a couple of things. One, education. The issue of both drivers and pedestrians on their phone all the time did not exist 20 years ago. That's a new issue, and it's creating a lot of problems, and we haven't done much education on that. We don't have enforcement. We tied our own hands by prohibiting red light cameras, as Tom noted. But we also, when was the last time you were concerned about getting a speeding ticket in the city? Right? And, you know, examples in the last 2 weeks, there was a motorcycle without a headlight that got into a collision and 2 riders died. There was a gentleman that laid down on Oracle Road and was run over by a vehicle at 2 in the morning. And we got some things that are not engineering issues. They're issues that have to do with education and enforcement as well. I think we also have issues, Albert, you touched on this in a really smart way, is we keep getting in our own way. Tom talked about lighting. The city of Tucson has decided to do lighting on every roadway project in the city that they do. Every time we try to do that on a city project, the adjacent neighborhoods fight it. And I understand why they do it, but as a community, we need to make a decision as to what's more important. Talk about increasing density. I know we've been approached 3 or 4 times to work on a project at Rosemont and Speedway. And every time that's come forward, it's been the neighborhood that's opposed it because of additional traffic. So they don't want the density, even when it has reduced parking requirements or other things. So we keep looking for the perfect, and we let that be the enemy of the good a lot of the time. And that's how I feel about this RTA plan. I don't think it's perfect, far from it. I know the process to get to where we are was not the way it should be, but I think it has, if you look at the plan, there's things to like.
Alejandro, do you have a question?
Oh, I'm sorry.
We only have a few minutes left, so.
I think
Okay. No, I mean, I appreciate you sharing.
I have another minute, if not, that's fine.
I think the only thing I just want to, like, when I was really listening to you, Tom, today, the thing that struck me, again, you know, having been here my whole life, been here when the first one passed, and just hearing your examples of like what Calgary started in 1988, didn't like Japan start with their bullet train like in the 70s, and it took political will, and these things just take like leadership and yes, community fortitude to say we are going to do these things and we believe in it and we're going to invest in these things. This is where we're going to invest. And you know, right, didn't Eisenhower like pour a bunch of money to create our interstate system? So it's like we have examples. So why can we do it for roads, but we can't do it for trains? Why can't we do it for safety improvements? And sure, there are enforcement and other things that we need to be doing to make our streets safer. Or I mean, I guess you could argue about enforcement. There's like a whole thread that we could go down there. But design is definitely going to slow people down. You know it. You go turn down another street that's narrow, you're going to slow down. You feel it. And there are simple things that we just know impact, and this is like data-driven. This isn't some, pie-in-the-sky idea. It is actually just putting policy into practice. And that, to me, is very pragmatic. And to me, it's not about being visionary. It's really just like, what do we actually want to see in our community? And this is a long-range plan. Therefore, we need to start planning now. And if we want to make incremental changes for the next year to kind of fill little holes, then sure, you can do that. But RTA had an option to do that. There was on the table the potential to do a shorter voting time, to have like a 10-year plan. And 10 years still is a pretty big commitment in my opinion, but even 5 years to get undelivered projects done, get RTA's house clean, and do a meaningful process. And that was not the path that was chosen. And so we are committing to 20 years. And I think a pragmatic thing to do is just be really thoughtful about what are we committing to, and where are we gonna be in 20, whatever that is. I don't even know what that is.
2024. Do the math.
Somebody do the math in 2045. I just don't want to fall, 40 years behind Calgary.
Okay, we're almost at time, and I think we had a lot of great discussion, a lot of great questions. Sorry.
Actually, I think
Okay, one last one.
Add on to what Moss is saying as well, is we're committing with this plan, and it's not about just is the plan relevant, but we're giving $3 billion to a board that we don't control. They're not elected. They are people that are appointed or elected by communities. We have one vote on that board. So if we want to be visionary, if we want to see things change, you can't give $3 billion to a board we can't control. We can control our city council by voting people out of office. So a tax within the city of Tucson is much more amenable, and we can provide more oversight than what the RTA gives us.
All right, I'm going to end with one final question for you all. Okay? And then we're wrapping up. If you could change one thing about how we plan regionally for transportation, what would it be and why?
Gosh, use the data that we have and put it into practice.
Yeah, if we were going to change one thing, I would say listen to what people really want by having authentic engagement with them, and then challenge our professionals to use their skill to deliver that vision.
Whether it's Tucson, Vancouver, Calgary, any city in the world, you don't get anything done without political will. So I would encourage any politician in Tucson to be brave, to have your principles, to try to achieve that higher vision that will help improve quality of life for generations beyond.
Thank you, Tom, Moss, Albert, and everyone who's participated and shown such engagement to stick with us tonight. I think everybody is walking away with a little bit more information and insight. And what